Praise God, give thanks to the Father in all that you say and do. Well, amen. Amen. Sing glory, hallelujah.
This is Ben May, and I want to thank you for being with us as we continue to seek the old past. We are studying through the Bible story, and now we have gone from the creation all the way now to the time that we call the divided kingdom. And if you remember our outline, there are 17 categories that we have divided the Bible story into. And it is a wonderful way to get a quick grasp of the Scripture story. And so now, as we come to nearing the end of the divided kingdom, it's really a sad time because it is a consequence of God's people having turned their back on Jehovah. But I appreciate that you're with us. And I encourage you to find your study guide, and we're going to begin on page 115. And the study guide is free to you. If you'd like to have a copy, we'd be happy to furnish you with one. It's a wonderful addition to your own library as you study and this point in the Scriptures from time to time. I hope that you've enjoyed being with us in these studies. I appreciate the comments that we hear from time to time and knowing that it is being of help. We want to seek the old past because, again, that's where the good way is. Now, as we study the Old Testament, we see so many principles that still apply to us today. Now, I'm thankful that we do not live under the Old Testament covenant. Aren't you glad that when you sin, you don't have to go find some animal to offer as a sacrifice? I am. I'm saddened that it took the sacrifice of my Lord, of Jesus Christ, to forgive my sins. But I'm so thankful that He was willing to do just that. And so now as we turn our Bibles now, we're going to just very briefly review and looking at an abbreviated family tree. We've looked at this from time to time. And so we remember now that the divided kingdom consists of Judah and Israel. Judah is the southern kingdom. Israel is the northern kingdom. This is the last lesson about Israel. Israel will be taken completely into captivity by the time we're through with our thoughts this time. Judah will be left alone, which is the name of the next category of time as we have divided the Bible. Divided kingdom, then Judah alone. But notice on our chart, we'll start talking about Uzziah. Uzziah was a good king. Unfortunately, for some reason, he decided to do that which only the priests were allowed to do, and that was to offer incense in the temple. Because of that, he was smitten with leprosy. His son Jotham is reigning now in this present part of our study, and he's a good king. Uzziah was a good king. We don't know why he decided to do what he did. Maybe his pride lifted him up. But now Jotham, his son, is reigning. You notice now below him is Ahaz. Ahaz, we'll see, is a very wicked king. Below him is Hezekiah. Hezekiah would be one of the best kings. And then notice on the other side of the chart there is Israel. Now we only have Micah here. Micah is currently reigning, as was the case with the other kings of Israel. He was very wicked. In fact, remember the way that he came to power? He took 50 men and he went to Samaria and the palace there, and he murdered the current king, the Pekah. And Pekah was no better than Pekah. They were both wicked. And then in the southern kingdom, we had Jotham, remember. Jotham reigned for 16 years. He's a good king. He did what was right. The only problem was the people didn't do what was right. They acted corruptly. And so we go back now and let's look at Israel. Because remember, the northern kingdom, Israel, this is their last part of the story. Now there will be some mention of them, of course. But sad to see the end come to that part of God's people. And so we find now the beginning of Israel's captivity. Interestingly, in your study guide, you'll notice that it goes back to 1 Chronicles chapter 5. Now, as you turn in your Bibles to 1 Chronicles chapter 5, this is at the very beginning of the history of the kings. In fact, it hasn't even talked about David yet. And yet here we are talking about what's going to happen to part of the northern kingdom. And the reason I think that it's put here is because it's just been given a lot of genealogies and talking about the family of Manasseh, for instance. And Manasseh is going to be one of the ones to be taken into captivity now. And so we read in 1 Chronicles 5, verse 25, "And they were unfaithful to the God of their fathers, and played the harlot after the gods of the peoples of the land, whom God had destroyed before them. So the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria," that is, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. "He carried the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh into captivity. He took them to Halah, Habar, Hara, and the river of Gozan to this day." As of the date of the writing, the recording of this history, the northern kingdom had been taken into those places where we have just read. Now, if you look at a map, you'll notice that when Pul took the Syrian throne, he took the town of Tiglath-Pileser III. Gilead was that land on the east side of the Jordan. And that's where Reuben, Gad, and half-tribe of Manasseh had settled, if you remember from our previous study. And so from Mount Hermon to the Arnon River, we find the area that is called Gilead. And that's taken now. It's gone. And we'll notice that's not the end, of course. That's the beginning of this captivity. Well, there's war going on, though. You've got enough problems. You have Assyria who's coming in, and they're nibbling away now. In fact, Gilead is a big chunk, not just a nibble, was it? But prior to the end of Jotham's reign in Judah, God began to send Pekah of Israel and Rezin of Damascus against Syria. So here you've got the northern kingdom and the Syrians converging now on the king of Judah. Now, we're not given a whole lot of details, and we'll learn a little bit more later about the Syrians and the northern kingdom of Israel ganging up, you might say, against Israel. Now, let's go back to Judah. Judah, we find that their king Jotham, remember he was a good king. The people weren't, but he was. He dies, and he's buried in Jerusalem, the city of David. His son Ahaz now is going to ascend to the throne. Unfortunately, Ahaz would be one of the most wicked kings in Judah's history. He was 20 years old when he took the throne. And it's hard to imagine the kind of things Ahaz was doing. His father was good, his grandfather was good, and here he is, while he's worshiping Baal. And he even offered his own children as sacrifices to that false god. This is also, in our study here, this is the first mention of worship in the Valley of Hinnom. The Valley of Hinnom. Now you may wonder, now what is the significance of that? Let me share some information with you now on the Valley of Hinnom, the Hinnom Valley. It is a deep, narrow ravine located in Jerusalem. The Valley of Hinnom had a very horrendous history in ancient times. It was used as a place where the pagan worshippers did all sorts of vile and wicked things, including burning children alive as sacrifices to the idols Molech and Baal. One section of the valley was called Tophet, or the fire stove, where the children were slaughtered. You'll find that mentioned in 2 Kings 23, verse 10. It was a place of tremendous evil for many years. Well, after their return from the Babylonian exile, now we haven't come to that yet, that'll be a couple of periods later, but after their return from the Babylonian exile, the Jews turned the Hinnom Valley into the city dump, where garbage and anything deemed unclean, including the bodies of executed criminals, was incinerated. For that purpose, a fire was kept constantly burning there. Even though it was no longer used for evil worship, with all the filth and thick smoke, it remained a very dark and dreary place. Now here's where it becomes important in our understanding of the way some ideas were expressed in the New Testament. The Hebrew name Hinnom was translated into Greek as Gehenna. That's the word that the concept of hell originated. That's the word that was used. Now, that didn't come up with hell. Hell was already there. But the terminology for it, why refer to it as Gehenna? By the time of Jesus Christ, the deep, constantly burning valley of Hinnom was also known as the valley of Gehenna, or hell, and had taken on a popular image as the place down there where the wicked would eventually be cast into the flames for destruction. Jesus would talk, remember, about the place where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched. He was talking about the valley of Hinnom, or Gehenna Valley, because literally the fire was not quenched, the worm didn't die. There's also some dead, decaying something there, full of the worms and all. A terrible, foreboding place. And so the concept of hell, God could use that to impress upon the Jewish mind how terrible it would be to go there. They knew they didn't want to go there. And so God used it to paint that picture. Now, going back to our thoughts, our study. We're talking now about the combined the Judah and Israel both. There's war between Ahaz, Pekah, and Rezin. Pekah and Rezin, see, they had formed a coalition, and they came and wanted to battle Judah, who was now under the leadership of King Ahaz. Now, they weren't able to overpower him, but they did a lot of damage. It's thought that the problem was that Pekah and Rezin had formed an alliance trying to withstand the Assyrians. Judah wouldn't go along. So they were trying to get rid of Judah because Judah might turn and be an ally of their enemy, the Assyrians. And that proves to be right. Isaiah, remember the prophet Isaiah? He was sent by God to meet Ahaz outside of Jerusalem, and he had an important message. And so he's trying to reassure Ahaz that don't worry about Israel and Syria. They're not going to accomplish what they're setting out to accomplish. But he says now, down in verse 9, the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son. If you will not believe, surely you shall not be established. He wanted Ahaz to believe. And so he says to Ahaz, now Isaiah says, you just ask God for a sign. Well, Ahaz refused, saying he's not going to test the Lord. Really, he had very little faith in the Lord. God sent Ahaz a sign anyway. This is a very important scripture because the ultimate fulfillment of this passage is in the birth of Jesus. Notice the verse, Isaiah 7, verse 14. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. That's quoted in the announcement of the birth of Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment of the virgin conceiving and bearing a son, and his name being Emmanuel. Now, it had more immediate implications for King Ahaz. But now, again, Ahaz would not put his trust in God. And Pekah and Rezin, they come and they prevailed against him. Now, in doing that, Rezin, who would be the king of Syria, why, he took many captives away to Damascus, his capital. And then Pekah, who would be the king of Israel, he slew 120,000 men and took 200,000 captives to Samaria. While they were about to lead the southern kingdom into captivity, here we are talking about the demise of the northern kingdom, and it looks like they're going to cause the demise of the southern kingdom, but God was not going to allow that to happen. And so in 2 Chronicles 28, starting at verse 9, he said, but a prophet of the Lord was there, Obed, and he went out before the army that came to Samaria and said to them, look, because the Lord God of your fathers was angry with Judah, he has delivered them into your hand. But you have killed them in a rage that reaches to heaven. And now you propose to force the children of Judah and Jerusalem to be your male and female slaves. But are you not also guilty before the Lord your God? Now hear me, therefore, and return the captives, whom you have taken captive from your brethren, for the fierce wrath of the Lord is upon you. And so Obed is warning them, you're about to make matters much worse. And so as the soldiers are returning with their captains, then the leaders of Ephraim, they come out and they meet them, and they're opposed to this. They say, look, you're not bringing those captives here. You're going to make things even worse for us because Jehovah's already mad with us. But isn't that interesting, though, that they understood that God was mad with them and they didn't want him any more angry, and yet they wouldn't turn to him with all their heart to serve him. It's just hard to understand their thinking, isn't it? But now, to their credit, they let the captives go. Those 200,000 they had taken, they fed them, they clothed them, and they sent them back home. We find now that Judah's problems is not over. Not only have the Syrians and the northern kingdom come and done considerable damage, but they were attacked by the Edomites and by the Philistines. See, God was bringing Judah low because their king had encouraged moral decline. Remember, King Ahaz, one of the worst that they have ever had. Many villages are being taken and their inhabitants taken away as captives. It's sort of like they're nibbling all around the edges of the southern kingdom. And so God is trying to bring them back to their senses. Now, Ahaz, he refused to join the coalition of Micah and Rezin. And that's why I believe they came to fight against him. But he also refused to trust in Jehovah. So he won't go to the northern kingdom. He won't go to the Syrians. He won't go to God. He goes instead to Paul, who has taken the name of Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria. Now, the Assyrians are the major threat. They are the most powerful of all the nations at this time because God is using them to accomplish His will. And so Ahaz sends a message to King Paul of the Assyrians. In 2 Kings 16 and verse 7, he says, I am your servant and your son. Come up and save me from the hand of the king of Syria and from the hand of the king of Israel who rise up against me. And so Ahaz sends him a large gift, and sure enough, the king of Assyria decides to help. Now this is just serves his own interest. You know, he's going to end up coming and taking all he can anyway. But it does buy some time, and he makes 3 raids against Israel in 3 years. In fact, he marched to the sea and he even conquered the Philistines. He left troops at Egypt's border. Now this is Paul, the king of Assyria. But he didn't go on into Egypt. And then he turns his attention to Israel. And he takes several of the cities. And he burned them. He took the people captive. And so at this point, the whole northern portion of Israel was conquered. He is having his way with the northern kingdom. Only the area right around Samaria was left. It could be that he spared that area because Micah was killed by a man named Hoshea. See, Micah was the one who had stirred up the king of Assyria and who the king of Judah had asked to help with and sent him a bribe, you might say. But now there's a new king in Israel, and Hoshea becomes king of Israel, and he agrees to pay taxes to Assyria. That's all they're looking for anyway, for the most part, is money, power. And so that stopped the incursion for the moment. Now Isaiah is back on the scene. And at the invasion of the territory of Canaan that was originally given to Zebulun, to Naphtali, that the Assyrians come and they invade that, Isaiah writes a great message of hope. And as we look at that quote, remember that this is the same area where Jesus would do much of his later work. And so we find in Isaiah 9 in verse 1, Nevertheless, the gloom will not be upon her who is distressed, as when at first he lightly esteemed the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward more heavily oppressed her by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan in Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined. And what that is a reference to Jesus and his great work, his preaching of the gospel in that area. And you'll find that in Matthew chapter 4 and verses 12 through 16. Now, Paul, the king of Assyria, he turns his attention to the Syrians and he destroys Damascus. He kills the king, Rezin. Remember, Rezin was the big ally of the northern kingdom. But now he's gone. He's dead. All the people were taken captive. And Damascus is turned into an Assyrian province. Now there goes the northern kingdom's help. Their coalition, remember, was northern kingdom and the Syrians. And now the Syrians are gone. Now turning our attention for the moment back to Judah. Ahaz, the king of Judah, he continues in his wickedness. But now remember, he had called on the Assyrians for help. He is trying to align himself with the winning side, and that, I suppose, politically speaking, it worked. After Paul attacked Damascus and conquered it, Ahaz went up there to meet him. While he's there, Ahaz, now the king of Judah, offered sacrifices to the Syrian gods. Can you imagine such a thing? He is so impressed by what he sees that Ahaz has his priest, Uriah, to make a replica of the altar and have it ready for him when he gets back home. And that's what they do. Ahaz has God's altar moved from the front of the temple around to the north side of it. And this new pagan altar was put in its place. And so he continues to worship those gods of Damascus, and he set aside the worship of Jehovah to the point they finally just shut the doors of the temple of God, the centerpiece of Jerusalem. Now let's switch our attention back to Israel. Hoshea, we mentioned him already. He conspired against Micah and he killed him. He then reigned for 9 years. Now he was an evil king, but not as bad as the ones that came before him. Judah, going back to Judah, Ahaz, that wicked king, he dies and he's buried. But you know, they didn't bury him in the sepulchres of the kings as really a testament to how wicked he was. He died about 3 years after Hoshea, the king of Israel, began his reign. After the death now of Ahaz, Hezekiah, his son, begins to reign. He reigns for 29 years. Thankfully, for Judah's sake, Hezekiah is a very good king. In fact, he's the best king they had had since David. Now, there's going to be another excellent king after him. But for now, he is the best king that they've had. He just sets out to remove all the idolatrous practices. He cuts down the high places and the Asherahs. He trusts in God. He keeps the commandments. He was just successful in everything that he did. The very first month he was on the throne, he says, we need to get the temple back open. We need to get it cleaned out. We need to get the priests consecrated and the temple consecrated. And so Hezekiah told the Levites that it was because of the people's disobedience that God had brought all this wrath upon them. And so he says this in 2 Chronicles 29 and verse 10. Now it is in my heart to make a covenant with the Lord God of Israel, that his fierce wrath may turn away from us. My sons, do not be negligent now, for the Lord has chosen you to stand before him to serve him, and that you should minister to him and burn incense. Do you see Hezekiah's putting all the pieces back in place? Let me ask this question. Was Hezekiah inventing some new religion? Was Hezekiah making some new way of worship? They had not done such in a very long time. Well, everyone would say, well, no. He's just restoring what had been lost. And I want to suggest to you that that same thing can happen today as we seek the old paths. Because, unfortunately, people have gotten so far away from the Bible that it's hard to even recognize what people are doing supposedly in the name of Christ, and yet we can't find it in the Bible. And so when we say, let's get back to the Bible, let's seek the old paths, and when we emphasize, let's go back to the Scripture, that's where the good way is. And we start doing things exactly like the Bible says without adding to it or taking away from it. Have we started something new? No. We've only restored that which was lost for a time. And so we find that here as Hezekiah is doing that very thing. Now, again, they're cleansing the temple. And the Levites, they're doing their work very diligently. It took them 16 days to get the temple cleaned out and to sanctify it. Well, they tell him in 2 Chronicles 19, verse 18, we have cleansed all the house of the Lord, the altar of burnt offerings and all its articles, and the table of showbread with its articles. And so they're ready, they're saying. And so now they want to put worship back in place as God had commanded in His law. And so Hezekiah gathers all the city officials together, and the sacrifices were offered, the ceremonies were held. And Judah and the king of Judah and all the people, they rejoiced because God had blessed their work and had helped them to do this so quickly. Now, in his first month on the throne, Hezekiah reopened the doors of the temple and made repairs. He called the priests and the Levites to consecrate themselves and the people. Got to get ready. He told the Levites again that it was because of disobedience that all this had happened, and so they want to put everything back into place. And so, in keeping with the law, Hezekiah wanted to celebrate the Passover feast. Now, this Passover feast was to be celebrated on the first month of each year, but, they just weren't ready. And so they said, we're going to celebrate the second month. Now, we had just said, let's go back to the old past and do things God's way. Was this a change in the way God wanted it done? No. God had made provision that if for some reason, and He gave the reasons, you could not keep the Passover the first month, you would be allowed to take it the second month. And that's what they're doing. Now, they just sent messengers everywhere. And they wanted everybody, whatever remnant was left, even in the northern kingdom, though it had been taken by the Assyrians, he said, you come on down and you come celebrate the Lord's Passover with us. And so there were some that laughed and mocked, but there were others who came from Asher, from Manasseh, and from Zebulun. And so God was with Judah. And it says to give them singleness of mind, of heart, to obey the command of the king at the word of the Lord. And so a large crowd gathers, and they keep that Passover, and they take every vestige they can find of the false gods, and they throw them into the Kidron Valley. The priests and the Levites, they consecrate themselves, they offer the burnt offerings, but this had not been done in so long, and they were trying to do it so quickly that many of the people were not ceremonially clean. There was provisions in the law that says, here's how you need to be when you take the Passover. They just weren't ready. Hezekiah prayed to God and asked them, please, to pardon. God, please pardon it because of these circumstances. God heard the prayer and He healed the people. Now keep in mind, only God can make exceptions. Hezekiah had to go to God to see, would this be okay this time? And so that did not become the rule. Too often when somebody thinks they found some exception to God's rule, they make that the rule. But no, this was not the case at all. And so they celebrated for 7 days, and it went so well, they went 7 more days. And just abundance of sacrifices offered. And then when it's all over, and all the false gods had been removed, they returned to their own homes. And so Hezekiah did all that he could to bring the people back to God. Now, Samaria, unfortunately, did not do such a thing, and they're about to fall. Hoshea, the king of Israel, the northern kingdom, had been paying tribute to Shalmaneser. He had succeeded Paul, the king of Assyria. He decided to rebel, and he's going to get Egypt to help him. That didn't work. Shalmaneser came down, and Hoshea was thrown into prison. And so in 2 Kings 17, verse 5, now the king of Assyria went throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away to Assyria and placed them in Halah and by the Habar, the river of Gozan, and in the city of the Medes. Shalmaneser dies, and he's succeeded by a man named Sargon II. Sargon documented how he conquered Samaria and carried thousands away into captivity. Now Samaria is an Assyrian province, all because they would not turn their hearts back to God. Isn't that sad? A sad ending to such a large part of the people of God. We'll take this up right here next time. Won't you be with us as we continue to seek these old paths? That's where the good way is, and let's find it and walk in it.
A blind man sat by the road and he cried. A blind man sat by the road and he cried. A blind man sat by the road and he cried, oh.